Thank you for speaking to us. I'd like to begin by asking you, any country that has gone through a lot of trauma at the time of creation, it needs a kind of a closure. And Bangladesh never seemed to have got that. Do you think that this war crimes trial which is going on, that is going to give Bangladesh the closure that it desperately needs?
Well, I would first of all like to suggest that the closure is very necessary. And that is what the war crimes trials are intended to give. Whether or not they will succeed is now becoming more and more a moot question as this particular government approaches the end of its tenure. Because I would suggest that this is the last opportunity Bangladesh will have to secure that closure, because if they do not end these trials before the next elections and another government formed by the BNP Jamaat comes into power, they will ensure that this history is now finally wiped out and that no one will ever be able to bring the guilty to justice in future.
An obvious question was, why did it take so long for it to happen? Why did it take? I mean, what were the impediments that?
Precisely because the very forces who colluded or collaborated with the war crimes came to the center stage of power. It is the occasions on which the Awami League was in power, it was never strong enough. It was never able to fully dominate the politics and the environment in Bangladesh. Two factors are here. The Jamaat Islami BNP combine is basically sympathetic to the collaborators, or is headed by the collaborators themselves, as is the case with the Jamaat Islami, and has at least some of the collaborators as members, as is the case with the BNP. Number two, for many years the Pakistani intelligence services and the army had managed to restore their influence in the Bangladesh intelligence services and the army. So Pakistan and Bangladesh are sort of operating in tandem, and that is why you saw this great resurgence, so to speak, of Islamist extremist terrorism in Bangladesh and outwardly directed into India from Bangladesh through the 2000s. This combine effectively not only prevented any action being taken against the guilty, but I think more importantly suppressed the history of the war crimes. If you see the curricula that have been defined in the schools in Bangladesh, you see that the freedom struggle has very little reference to the atrocities, to the war crime, to the genocidal campaigns that were carried out in 1971. And this has been a deliberate effort by these parties who were colluders, who were collaborators, to wipe out this phase of history so that they are able to consolidate their power and bring back the same kind of politics of Islamism, of a right extremist kind of thinking into the Bangladesh environment.
You talked about Pakistan. The obvious question is that the Pakistani generals are going to be kept away from this. Why did that happen, and is it fair?
Well, obviously it isn't fair. Obviously Pakistan will never be brought to book for what it actually did, and it was the architect of the genocide. Now, Bangladesh is too weak a country to sort of even secure effective international action against those who were responsible from the Pakistani side. The best it can do, and the best it can even hope for, is to bring the guilty on its own soil to book. And even in that, I think they have embarked on a very, very uncertain gamble, because even within Bangladesh, the forces who today are supportive of the collaborators are a very, very strong political force. And Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League's gamble could very well result in its own, I would say, in a tremendous amount of political violence against these formations.
You're using a very strong term. You're saying Sheikh Hasina it's a gamble for her. And it is a precarious situation that she is in, and if she's going in for a gamble, do you think that she could lose, and this trial is something that she could just withdraw the support that she's giving this trial, and it could all fall through?
She will not withdraw the support. She is fully committed The Awami League and the groups connected with the freedom struggle are completely committed to this. But the gamble is whether or not they are able to complete the processes and bring the guilty to book before the next election. Because what we are seeing is another storm gathering. You see, one thing that you need to understand is the popular psyche in Bangladesh today. As a result of a very successful campaign over all these decades in trying to wipe out the memory of the war crimes, what you have is a younger generation, at least, people who were born not very much before the freedom struggle, or people who were born afterwards. So people who are in their 30s and their 40s, who have almost no sense of the enormity of what was done in 1971. The result is the BNP Jamaat-e-Islami, among their own support base and among fence-sitters and the undecided, have been able to project the entire war crimes trial as a show trial, as an effort to politically marginalize or damage the BNP Jamaat by the Awami League. So it's a partisan affair. It's not a real quest for justice. Now this would appear absurd to anyone who actually has a memory of 1971. But it is not so absurd to a people who do not have a memory and whose the histories they have been taught have deliberately eliminated this
How
aspect.
did this happen? This is what, it's so difficult to understand, especially for Indians. For us, it's impossible to imagine for any Indian to forget the trauma of partition. No Indian can forget the trauma of partition, though it's 60 plus years. Whereas, how has Bangladesh forgotten the trauma of its creation, where millions were killed, where they were raped, and it's just 1971 that it happened. So how did it happen that they've just forgotten or erased it from the memory?
You see, this is what happens in controlled societies, or societies that have been under autocratic rule for extended periods of time, societies that are dominated by religious ideologies, societies where education has a very, very strong overlay of propaganda, of ideology. The net result is that the children are brought up to believe what they are taught to believe. Okay. There is no context of questioning, there is no context of a constant reappraisal of history. The history that is taught in any event is a particular history. To say they have forgotten the trauma of the freedom struggle is wrong. They never learnt of it.
It's like what happened in Pakistan. They don't believe that in 71 that they caused the rapes, that they caused the genocide. Most Pakistani children post 71 don't know that a genocide happened and it was caused by their generals, isn't it?
Absolutely. Pakistan teaches a completely different history of the 71 war as compared to, say, the Indian perception or the international perception or the Bangladeshi perception. Pakistan has invented its entire post-independence history. In fact, it has reinvented its entire pre-independent to West Asia rather than to the subcontinent. That is what I mean by controlled societies, by ideologically overwhelmed societies, not just dominated but ideologically overwhelmed societies. Now for many phases, except for the brief tenures that Sheikh Hasina was in power and the very short denial has been the integral element of all regimes, military and non-military. So when denial has been the integral element of all these regimes and it has passed through into the school textbooks, into the environment of discourse, you will be astonished that even today in the media in Bangladesh, the reportage on the war crimes is extremely subdued. The question is why? Because everyone lives in an atmosphere of fear in Bangladesh, thinking that if the BNP Jamaat come back and we are seen to have been advocating the trials, we will be victimized, selectively pulled out and harmed.
And if you could briefly tell me what were the nature of the war crimes and, will there be closure for those who were victims of those war crimes?
Look, I think if you want to summarize what the war crimes were all about, then the Pakistani commander in what was then East Pakistan, Niazi, he had made a declaration. He said, "I will leave a bastard and a mourning lamp in every house." That was the strategy. That is what they set out to do and achieved in significant measure. They raped as an instrument of policy.
In every
And
home.
Well, they tried in every home. The total number of rapes in that period of about 7-8 March to December, about 8 or 9 months, was over 200,000 rapes, at least. And you know that rape is something that is often not even reported or mentioned. So 200 recorded rapes, close to 3 million killed. Over 10 million refugees on Indian soil.
And when killed, then you're talking about orphans, you're talking about families which have lost their bread earner.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you're also talking about that, but you're also talking about the sheer, you're very often not even talking about orphans, because entire families, men, women, children, everyone was killed. You're talking about the shock of a violence that those who have experienced it directly or indirectly, in their families, in their villages, as witnesses, they will never be, shall we say, healed.
Why was the international community silent then and subsequently all these years?
The dominant community internationally was silent because America was the dominant power then, as it is even today, and America supported Pakistan and did not want the truth of what was happening in East Pakistan to come out. And the Western powers, by and large, went along with this.
And India could not, because its voice was not heard? India
did not have that kind of a voice. India, I think, still has a very limited influence in international discourse. We are not even able to very effectively put across our own problems in terms of, our victimhood as from organized state-sponsored terrorism.
And Russia, which was then USSR, did not want to get involved? What was the...
You see, there was no very active... Russia supported us clearly. When the Americans sent in their 7th Fleet, there was a quiet assurance on the Russian side that we are behind you. Fortunately, that never came to an actual confrontation. We don't know where it would actually have gone. Russia did support us, but again, the so-called international debate was really a Western debate. It was a debate dominated by the America-allied Western powers. If you had a voice there, you were heard. If you didn't have a voice there, you basically ranted into the winds, which is what we tried to do. This is not to say that all of the West ignored these things. There were several Western agencies who described this as the worst genocide of history. Even the Beatles had a song about Bangladesh. So you did have people making efforts to bring attention to what was happening in East Pakistan, Bangladesh. But the American hegemony was so immensely powerful that there was no question whatsoever of effectively countering it.
Tell me, we helped in the creation, India helped in the creation of Bangladesh. After that, did we kind of just abandon them after that? Did we just like, we're done with you, we've created, we've helped you in the creation, but this war crimes thing, handle it on your own? Was that our attitude?
No, I think it's far more complex. One, let's be very, very clear. India's foreign policy failures are too many to recount. India's foreign policy, particularly in the neighborhood, has been abysmal. Our whole orientation tends again to be Western. We want all our limited diplomatic resources are overwhelmingly concentrated in the West. So we did not have very much of what you would call effective management over here. Two, there is a conundrum, there is a dilemma. Too active a role in post-independence Bangladesh would immediately make a lot of people within Bangladesh say that India is behaving like an occupying power, or is trying to be the hegemon, or is trying to subsume the Bangladeshi identity and sovereignty within some inchoate, Indian dominance.
Did the political parties then, did they give those feelers to India that stay away?
Yes. Dissonant voices were always there. Even Mujibur, with all his gratitude to India, was also, was a sort of, please, hands off, let us do it ourselves. More importantly, I think nobody thought that you could say the Bangladeshi spring would be so short. 71 you have independence, 75 Mujibur is gone, and what the powers that come in after that are all ambivalent powers. They are powers who seek once again to harness the same Islamist, extremist kind of forces, the same politics that was the army mullah combine, which was dominating the politics of Pakistan, is restored after 1975 in Bangladesh, and very soon India is actively being pushed out. The only friend India has ever had in Bangladesh has been the Awami League, who are the only people, the Mukti Bahini people, the Awami League people, who have a memory, a hard, you could say, institutional memory of what was actually done in 1971 and the role that India played. Everybody else is,
There are many who say that, India shouldn't put all its eggs in one basket, not just stay with one political party. We've always done that, We've always been with Sheikh Hasina.
You need to understand what choices we have and can have. It would be wonderful if we could, be friends with everybody, but I don't think it is very likely that the Jamaat-e-Islami and the BNP are waiting for India to they would rather make friends with Pakistan. And in the polarized politics of this region, it is a stark choice. It is the one or the other. We would love to make friends with all the people who are blowing things up in India as well, but they don't want to make friends with us. So let's make it very clear. It's not a question of putting all your eggs in one basket. It's a question of discovering or determining who your friendly constituency is and developing relationships there. I don't think India has ever said that a BNP government is not acceptable to us. While the BNP was in power, I think continuous efforts were made even during that phase to improve trade relations, to improve relations on a number of other things, but nothing made any headway because Bangladesh was at that point of time being used as an active launch for terrorism against India. Across India's northeast, every single terrorist organization operating in India's northeast had safe haven in Bangladesh. Progressively, you saw more and more Islamist terrorist attacks occurring on Indian soil, in some sense having a Bangladeshi footprint. The Harkatul Jihad Islami Bangladesh was actively involved. A lot of Pakistani groups were transiting through, were being facilitated to operate through Bangladesh. So in these circumstances, to make this as some kind of a choice that India makes, to be friends only with one party, is not a correct representation of what the real options available. The option of friendship with the BNP Jamaat-e-Islami combined is limited by their own ideological bent and their own preferences.
In conclusion, what I'd like to ask is that the war crimes trial, if it concludes before the elections that are going to be held there, is it going to rake up too many raw wounds, and is it going to cause too much of tumult in Bangladeshi society? Will it be able to contain itself within its democratic, boundaries out there?
I don't think the war crimes trials, if concluded, will be defining in terms of what will happen to Bangladeshi democracy. Bangladeshi democracy has always been extremely fragile, extremely tentative. I mean, there's been recurrent army rule or proxy army rule. Even the interim government, the so-called caretaker government, the last caretaker government, was again a military-dominated exercise which extended its own tenure. Fortunately, they went back to the barracks, which is a wonderful thing. But let's understand one thing very clearly. This tension is constant. To say that the war crimes trials would exacerbate this tension, so let's do away with the war crimes trials, doesn't really give you a fair understanding of what the actual situation is. These tensions are going to come to a head before the elections anyway, war crime trial or no war crimes trial. If you have the top of the Jamaat-e-Islami and some people of the top leadership of the BNP in jail today, it is not the case that the JEI and BNP are a more disruptive and dangerous force in the streets. They are as dangerous a force in the streets with these people out, number one, and they would be as dangerous a force in the field, in the streets, even if these war crimes trials had never been set up. They see themselves, the politics of Bangladesh is completely polarized. The war crimes trials are doing nothing to deepen or widen this polarization. It is already completely polarized. So any instability, violence, disruption that occurs will occur whether or not the war crimes trials are in place.
Thank you very much for speaking to us.
You're very welcome.